Thank everybody for coming today to celebrate Bob Williams' 98th birthday. I'm going to make a couple of quick comments and then we're going to hand it off to the luminary, Ted Robinson. So a couple of big resume points about Bob. In his youth, he was awarded the Eagle Scout. He was part of the American Swimming Relay record-holding team out of Sausalito. He was in the Naval Academy, as all of you folks know. He was class president, brigade commander, and a two-sport varsity athlete.
All right.
Bob was in the Naval Academy class of 1945, graduated early, and at that graduation, he was awarded the 1897 Leadership Sword, which acknowledges the leader of that distinguished class. He went on to fight in World War II, and he fought in 4 different Pacific campaigns. Kudos, Bob. After leaving the Navy, Bob enjoyed a distinguished career in international life insurance and was highly honored and highly publicized. For the last 20 years of his old age, Bob has been transferring his values and his ideals focused on his 2 national initiatives, which you're going to definitely hear more about today. Enhance sportsmanship and honoring our veterans. These programs have involved and inspired millions of Americans over the last few years. In the words of former Chief of Operations Admiral Carl Trost, quote, "Bob is a Naval Academy and a national treasure. No Naval Academy graduate as a volunteer has had a greater impact or as a lasting one. His legacy will live on long after he is gone." Bob's had an impact at the Palo Alto Club, as we all know, bringing generals to speak here, Stanford folks to speak, and all different others involvement in our different activities. After today's program, we're going to have cake, and so please make it a social hour to kind of connect and talk to different individuals. But let me pass it on to Ted, our luminary, our guest, and our friend, Ted Robinson.
Thank you, John. A lot of introductions. Luminary, that's a first. There we go. I looked that up and I go,
I love it.
And so it's great to be back with all of you and see all the familiar faces. A few of you are going to get up here and talk about Bob. We all have to save something, right? We have to save something because we have to do this again next year. And then 2 years, what the heck are we going to do for you in 2 years?
I have a comment. The hell with a funeral.
Amen. So before we bring up our distinguished array of people to honor Bob, I was just sitting with him at the table and I was asking Bob, the first time we met, I can't really remember the specific first time, but I think the first connection we really made was when I was still calling Stanford football. But Bob reached out to me about Notre Dame, my alma mater. And Bob had this idea about having Notre Dame's players imbue sportsmanship, and at the end of a game, go over in front of the student body and sing the alma mater, regardless of outcome. Very important qualifier. Well, at Notre Dame, there's only one outcome. So, having been imbued with that spirit, I tried politely to communicate to Bob that I wasn't sure that Notre Dame would really embrace that kind of idea. And I forget which coach it was then, but we're in an era when they were actually losing some home games. And Notre Dame people don't have a sense of humor about that. And I didn't know that they would embrace that. You think that stopped him? Heck no. And after how many years of pushing, Bob got it. You got it done. And I think Weiss was the head coach, and Notre Dame agreed, and the team, and they do it to this day, they go over and the players stand in front of the student body and the band plays Notre Dame Our Mother after every game, win or lose. And that was my first real connection with Bob and how extraordinary that was. The other one that John just touched on it, that Bob's business before, I think a lot of us knew Bob, was in the insurance business. You sold a life insurance policy to the guy who became the king of Saudi Arabia? Which of course leads to the obvious question, what the hell are you doing here? Why aren't you living in some villa in some castle? My God, that's one of the great sales jobs of all time. That is unbelievable. I didn't know that. I've known Bob probably 15 years, and that just recently did I find that out. Sold one to a guy who becomes the king of Saudi Arabia. Well, a lot of the stuff that John just touched on, I think many of our speakers will touch on as well. So let's start by welcoming up John Steinhardt. John?
So I thought I'd start with just maybe a little historical perspective. 1921, what was the world that Bob was born into? So just a couple of highlights. I'd call it a world of turmoil and transition. So President Warren Harding signed the congressional resolution officially ending World War II. One. He breaches so much time. It's easy to make mistakes. The U.S. Congress sharply curbed immigration by setting national quotas. Adolf Hitler becomes the leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Mussolini forms the National Fascist Party of Italy. J. Edgar Hoover becomes the first assistant director of the FBI, or becomes the assistant director of the FBI. And in Tulsa, Oklahoma, there's a race riot, and 21 whites and 60 blacks are killed. So again, kind of deja vu in some ways, but a lot of change, a lot of turmoil. In sports, the Yankees purchased 20 acres in the Bronx, where they built the Yankee Stadium. And Babe Ruth had his best year in 1921, 59 home runs and 171 RBIs. In New York City, Albert Einstein lectured on his new theory of relativity. And more locally, we had the first transcontinental mail run from San Francisco to New York. And even more locally, the DeYoung Museum opens up in Golden Gate Park. So here's just a little sort of setting for where Bob is. And I think in this era, Bob walks into life, and somewhere early on, he builds this value system that I think carries through the rest of his life. And you've already heard some of it, and we're going to hear a lot more of it. So Bob grew up in Sausalito. He watched the Golden Gate Bridge actually being built. And in May 1937, he was one of the first people to walk across that bridge when it opened up. As noted, he was an officer in World War II, went to Stanford. He actually went to Stanford as an undergraduate, but then he transferred to the Naval Academy. And then after the Naval Academy, he went into the service, and then he came back for graduate work at Stanford. And then he had this long, very successful career in insurance, which both of the speakers before me noted. I think the sort of best of his life and his career was saved for the last. And to me, this is where the inspiration is. I mean, he's a guy who, in his 80s and 90s, did really just extraordinary accomplishments. And to me, that's the role model that I look to in Bob that inspires me, and I think should inspire everybody here. So notably, he had these two national initiatives, which we just mentioned, this honoring of veterans at high school and college athletic events throughout the U.S. And if you think about how many people show up in these stadiums, just in college bowls and college stadiums, this is millions of people every year who are paying tribute to veterans because of Bob's initiative. And the other one is all around this notion of sportsmanship, which is this ethics of sportsmanship. And one thing that Ted didn't mention in his insurance career was he really set the standards for the insurance business in terms of ethical standards that have been followed ever since. So what I wanted to emphasize, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, was the fact that in these last 20 years of his efforts to build these initiatives, Bob has accumulated more than 500 accolades. And over the last 5 years, he's shared, I think, every one of them with me. So I'm not going to read you 500, but I thought I'd read 3 of them, just to give you a flavor of this. So the first one comes from the U.S. Naval Academy Director of Athletics. And he said, I can think of no graduate who has been more important to the Naval Academy Athletic Association with regard to the promotion of sportsmanship fair play, and institutional camaraderie than Bob Williams. Another quote from the U.S. Air Force Academy, Brigadier General and also Director of Athletics there, said of Bob, "Bob, your sportsmanship and passion have earned you the reputation as the nation's #1 sportsmanship expert, authority, and advocate. No one can match your record for making a difference in sports in America." And lastly, coming from the recently resigned Defense Secretary, Jim Mattis, who Bob has brought into the club on a number of occasions, Jim said, "Two of his biggest initiatives have been the successful national efforts promoting sportsmanship and honoring veterans at more than 600 universities and colleges around the country, which I personally witnessed at Stanford." And he went on to say, "With his emphasis on ethics and sportsmanship, Bob brings a perspective that applies far beyond the playing fields, and his support to veterans is legendary. You are a heartening example to us all." And so I take those last words. To me, this is an extraordinary example throughout his life of somebody who pursued values that he believed in, starting with Boy Scouts, Eagle Scouts. He's been a competitor. If you've ever been enlisted in any effort that he's been involved, you know he is tenacious, he is dedicated, he's persevering. He just never gives up. And even at this age today, that's still the case with Bob. So Bob, happy birthday. You continue to be an inspiration.
Thank you, John. I can echo that tenacity. If I looked up in my email chain, the number of emails in your pursuit of the sportsmanship at the very beginning, and it's how I got to know Bob. And it's exactly it's why you've been so successful, that tenacity. And John touched on the other part of Bob's legacy, which is ethics. And Steve Ross is sitting there. Steve, why don't you come on up here? You want to add a little something today about, I think it's a perfect time to do that, about the recognition that Bob has received for not just the pursuit of sportsmanship, but ethics.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to comment that Bob, this is kind of an outside function outside of the Palo Alto Club. Bob joined the Palo Alto University Rotary Club about 6 years or so ago, and we have some members here today. And Bob's been nothing but a role model for all of us, an inspiration. He's partaken in all of our activities, plus his sportsmanship and his veterans work. He gets a standing ovation at least twice a year. He's what everybody looks up to and loves. And we just have the Bob Williams Inspiration Award that was just created for our club, that's given out every year. And of course, he's the first recipient. So, Bob, thank you.
All right, so I'm doing my math here. Bob joined the Rotary in what year, Steve?
6 years ago, whatever that year is.
So even I can do that math. You joined it in 92?
92.
92.
I want to meet some young people.
God, awesome. That's Bob Williams. All right, so now Ray, our good friend Ray Perper, sadly couldn't make it today. And so he asked Bob to speak for himself. How about that? Bob, come on. Stand up here.
If I can.
So, all right. We have, by the way, we're not done with you yet. We have plenty more people to speak. But something that, and you've heard that great honor you just received at Rotary about ethics. Sportsmanship, which I touched on, which is how I first got to know you and how you've made your mark, I think, in your 80s and 90s in the athletic world. What's the greatest sportsmanship moment, recognition, acknowledgement that you've received?
For many years ago, over in Scotland, I teach some young boys to honor the game. And I get tears in my eyes when I tell this story. But one day I was sitting in my office there at Middleton Park, got a letter from the Sports Council of Northeast Fife, which is St. Andrews area, and they say they were setting up a new golf tournament, and they asked if the name could be the Bob Williams Trophy. Well, I'm old enough to have taken a Dale Carnegie course in public speaking, but I'm not that good. I'm just a substitute today. But let's talk about sportsmanship. For years at football games, when the game was over, the teams would leave the field. And to me, that seemed like an unfair deal. There's a forgotten thank you in college football, and that is if the students cheer and rave for their team, win or lose, then the team walks off the field. Well, now at Stanford and around the nation, that is no longer so. The game is over, the team goes over and interacts with their fellow students, then the whole family comes together for the singing of the alma mater. At Stanford, for example, after the game, stay on sometime and see. I go over there every time with my heart, and there's so much pleasure out of watching the team come over and interact with their fellow students that all going together to the Stanford alma mater. And we set it up so that the words, line by line, show up on the big thing up there and you sing along. So, for me, that's the best moment at Stanford football games. I've had such fun. I've met some of the great luminaries in the sport over the years, and my win at Notre Dame, just so you're sure you know the impact, this coach said if we win, we stay, if we lose, we leave. Well, I went to the student body president and said, let's change that. I got turned down by the president of the church, and I said, when I was at Annapolis, I was leader and I looked for ways to improve the image of my school. And I said, you had just such an opportunity at Notre Dame. So I got her to get over 100 students to support the fact that win or lose, you stay. And she went to the football team, and they voted 100-2 to overturn Coach Kelly and the director of athletics, Mr. Swarbrick. I have such a passion. I want to tell you, I have 3 things in my life that keep me going. The hiring of veterans, the sportsmanship, and love of school. And I wake up every morning, I think, God damn it, what am I going to do today? There's so much on my plate. I don't even have time to read books. So that's what your substitute teacher has to say in the absence of Ray Perper. And as I say, the hell with the funeral. I'll be around the same time next year.
I never saw you prouder, and I've seen you in some wonderful moments, but when Navy came out here to play the bowl game, when it was still up in the city at the Giants ballpark, it was a few years back, and the luncheon the day before the game, I think, and I had you stand up. I think Chet Blanchuk was sitting at your table, right, the athletic director, and I've never seen you smile, because you were being acknowledged as a proud Naval Academy graduate, serviceman, and to have the football team there as representing the academy as well as they did. But what we all know, we love college athletics, and I've always felt this, the difference between pro sports and college sports. Pro sports we root with our head. College sports we root here, right? That's what root. It doesn't make any sense in a lot of ways to go sit at a game on a wooden bench. If we can watch it on TV at home in comfort, we go because we love the school. And that's what Bob represents. All right, our next speaker is Rick Flugel. So Rick's going to come up and talk. Rick, come on, Rick. Come on, Rick. Good.
So, let me see here. Well, this is going to be less stirring than Bob's discussion, but, and, but by George, I have here a letter from Chet Gladchuk, which I like. No, that's all you've got. So, Bob and I, to my knowledge, are the only 2 graduates of the Naval Academy at the Palo Alto Club. Graduated in 1944, I think, not 45, and I graduated in 1961. And it wasn't many years ago that Bob and I were talking, and another fellow joins us, and we were talking about the Naval Academy. A couple minutes later, he says, "Bob, are you 2 classmates?"
Good day for me.
Bob was, of course, delighted. I was annoyed. But I only raise it because I think it shows how much younger Bob presents in every way than he actually is. So that's one little thing I had to say. Another annoying thing about Bob, though, is that he's 98, but he's not lost a beat mentally. I can sit around and sometimes I've said, Bob, who is that guy over there? And he tells me. And I had no idea who it was, but I think he knows pretty much everybody at the club and everybody's name, and I'm just sort of amazed at that. My contemporaries and we may have known somebody for 20 years, and we blank on it. And unfortunately, for enough of us around, we finally get it, you know. So that is another. The other thing I wanted to mention about Bob personally is that he just has such a positive attitude about everything, right? So, and there was some discussion earlier about how Bob went to England and took lessons, and he got to be really a very good golfer. And then, as time went on, the handicap kind of inched up a bit. And you know, I remember maybe when he was around 90 or so, kind of got up around 20, which is pretty good. And so I would say, Bob, so what's your handicap these days? And he'd say, it's heading for 9. And you know, he knew it wasn't 1 to 9, but it just kind of, you know, tells everybody, you know, what a positive guy he is. And I did also want to say something on a somewhat more serious note, is that I think Bob is one of the most distinguished graduates of the Naval Academy. I haven't talked about that yet, but it was mentioned he graduated in '44. He was brigade commander. He's been the president of his class ever since, right? Every single year since 1944 to now, and that's pretty impressive. He's been a director of the Naval Academy Foundation for 20 years. So, and I know there are a bunch of Naval Academy people that are pretty well known, like all the admirals in World War II, like Halsey and all those guys, and John McCain, to name another guy. But I would say I'm not sure they've done more for the Naval Academy itself. They've done tremendous things for the country, but I'm not sure they've done more for the Naval Academy itself than Bob. I'm not sure if anybody has. This year, and every year, we have like 4 people that are nominated as distinguished graduates of the Academy, and almost always they're captains of industry or admirals and so on. This year we had a 4-star admiral who was a very illustrious guy, did a great job. We had the president of a company called BEA Systems, or BAE Systems, a great big aerospace company. We had another guy who's the chairman and started a company called CACI, CACI, whatever. So these are big captains, and we also had a woman who was a Navy captain and was an astronaut. But so they made it. Bob has had people nominated over the last few years, and it hasn't happened yet. But I would argue, in terms of helping the Naval Academy, none of these people has done what Bob has done and what has been discussed earlier. And the only thing I can say that is good is that there's still time.
My wife for contract.
So anyway, that's my thinking about it.
Thanks, Rick. That's great stuff. Classmates. Man, that's good. And that obviously leads into another terrific theme of Bob's life, which has been his work on behalf, not just of his alma mater, the Naval Academy, but all veterans, all people who served our country. And Roger's going to come up and talk a little bit more about that. Roger Smith.
Well, I'm honored to be here, and many of you know Bob's lovely wife, who wanted me to share a anniversary card that Bob recently gave to her. When people ask me, how does it feel to be married to such a thoughtful, loving, wonderful person, I always say the same thing. Ask my wife. That was not Bob's. That was something I gave to my bride. But anyway, I thought, because anyone that put up with this guy for so many years needs a star also. Bob decided that the veterans should have recognition at sporting events. So he started with the 5 service academies, wrote them, got some traction, then he wrote some more, and then he wrote some more. And as you well know, he has this big staff. He finally ended up sending out 600 letters to everyone that owned a helmet in the football world in college, and turned it around. It was a wonderful, wonderful thing. And so we honor veterans now. And Bob, being the salesman he is, when he sent the letters to the president and the athletic director, he reminded them when their game was going to be nearest Veterans Day. So it was a great selling point. And so now throughout the country, people are honored. And so Bob is the most enthusiastic guy I maybe have ever known. And I think his new mantra, though, he mentioned to me, and I think you will all agree this sounds like Bob. He gets up in the morning, he starts slow, and then he tapers off. There is no way that guy does this. I'm honored to be your friend. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Roger. Where'd you get that card?
I got
That's
this at Walgreens.
That's a little secret. This is a little secret for us. I like that. All right, next coming up, John Crouch is going to speak. John? There's John.
Good afternoon. It's my honor to wrap up our festivities today. I have 2 things to talk about. Bob, I'd like you to stand up if you please.
Oh, here we go again. Give me 5 minutes.
Well, I thought I'd give you a head start. Exactly. You're halfway there. Come on over. I have 2 things to do this afternoon. One is to present you with a gift on behalf of all the members of the club in recognition of your 98th birthday. This is not just decorative, this is your present from the club. So this is your Naval Academy flag. I will have that wrapped up properly by the time we are done with my second topic, which is we have a lovely birthday cake back there. Everybody ought to have a slice and stick around for a little while and wish Bob a happy birthday. Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you for the indelible memory. I'm glad you got me all choked up.
That's the idea.
How about a little happy birthday song?
That's a great idea. Somebody who could sing should start.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bob. Happy birthday to you.
This isn't just the Naval Academy's treasure, he's our treasure.
Absolutely.
Let them eat cake.